Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. I am your book reviewer, and today we're going to review the book The Shining by Stephen King. I have to apologize to my faithful readers or viewers, and because if you have watched my blog before, you've known that I've done a number of Stephen King books in the past, but I have not done The Shining yet, and that's very strange for those who know me because The Shining is one of my favorite Stephen King books. It's like one of my top two favorites. Mainly because it was the one that I read first, and that was the one that got me into liking him and caused me to read more of him. And actually, just kind of a little side note, my name my screen name for YouTube is Doc217, which is a Shining reference, which I will get to in my review. So, anyway, I'm imagining that almost everybody who has seen who has seen my views and watching this video has seen the movie The Shining that was done in like 1980 and had like Jack Nicholson and all that. If you have, and you haven't read this book, I'd say stop what you're doing, go out, to the library, because there don't seem to be bookstores, or get it on Amazon, or get it on your Kindle, or something. Read this book if you have just seen the movie, and you're a fan of the movie. If you've seen the movie and don't like it, don't bother. But the problem was that the main plot of the book is in the movie, but they leave so much out. And I'm going to explain either why or just kind of the main plot or things that you've missed. The main plot is it focuses on a young family that are called the Torrances. Jack and Wendy are the husband and wife, and they're about in their late 20s, maybe early 30s, and they have a 5-year-old son named Danny, and they've lived in a town called Stovington, Vermont. I wanted to look up to see if that was an actual town. I haven't yet, but you may want to do that. And Jack was a school teacher, and he was in a prep school and doing very well, but one of Jack's problems with his character and kind of with this person is that he's an alcoholic. He would go drinking with his buddy, whose name is Al Shockley, and he would drink until when he would get drunk, and he wouldn't always be a violent drunk exactly, but you doing that over and over, it's not a good way to live, obviously. And there was a time in his drinking days when they lived in Stovington where his drinking had caused him to be violent, and unfortunately the victim of his violence was Danny. He had been drinking, and Danny was just scattering like school papers, and he's also had a beer by his papers, either that he was grading, or Jack is also a writer, so it might have been school papers that he was correcting or papers that he was writing stories about or for. And he had spilled some of his beer on the papers, and Jack had lost it. He had basically whipped him around to spank him, and he pulled his arm, and he had dislocated his shoulder or broke his arm or something like that. But regardless, Danny, who was 2 or 3, was the victim, and Wendy was really contemplating divorce if she hadn't been contemplating it before, because of Jack's drinking, because she hated it. She didn't drink herself, but really hated that Jack did. So again, but you'd think that and part of the breaking of Danny's arm or dislocating or whatnot caused him to stop drinking, and it did and it didn't. And but there are a couple other instances with Al of that they didn't hurt anybody, but they really woke Jack up, and both Al too, and said, okay, we've got to stop this. And so it's maybe about a year, like 6 months to a year later, they're still in Stovington, and Jack is still working at his prep school, and there's a student at his prep school named George Hatfield, and along with teaching, Jack taught English, but along with teaching English, Jack was also head of the debate team, and George had been pressured by his father to join the debate team. Because his father was a lawyer, he wanted George to be a lawyer, and so he was like, a good opening for a lawyer is obviously to be on the debate team, you'd think. But unfortunately, George was not a strong debater because he stuttered. And so Jack, unfortunately, had to cut him. And George was really upset, and Jack was trying to explain, I'm sorry, it's because you stutter. And so George took it out on Jack's car where he had slashed his tires. And Jack had witnessed him doing this, and this was not infused by liquor, because Jack had sworn off drinking. This was just infused by his temper. He had really started to wail on George, and he had really hit him. And so, obviously, you can't do that if you're a teacher, hit a student. So Jack was fired. And so, that really took a wedge with him, because now that's all that he wanted to do, or that's all that he knew to do other than write, was teach. So he's kind of in a rut with Wendy and Danny, because again, he has a house or a family to support. And so with the help of Al, who's on the board of directors for the Overlook Hotel, he gets Jack a job caretaking for this Overlook Hotel. And so and it's in Colorado. It's a remote hotel in the mountains that closes every winter from like the end of September to the mid-May, let's say. So he gets the job, and he goes with Wendy and Danny, and at the beginning of the book, and what kind of in the start of the hotel, you learn that Danny has special powers where he can see things in his mind. He can see kind of the future, parts of the future. He knows what people are thinking, and he also can see part of what has happened in the past. And when they get to the hotel, he meets the chef, or the head cook of the hotel, whose name is Dick Halloran, and Dick has the same ability to read people's minds, to kind of see into the future, and to kind of see in the past. And so he knows that Danny has that power, and so he talks to Danny for a period of time and says, my grandmother had it, and we would have conversations totally mentally, and my grandmother called it The Shining, so hence the title. So but one of the things that Danny has been having is he's been having visions, really bad visions, about the Overlook Hotel. And what happens is that he gets a visit from a special imaginary friend that his family referred to him as, but he gets a visit from a little boy named Tony. And the description of Tony is that Tony is Danny in like body and facial features, but he's like 10 years older. So this is more like a 15-year-old boy showing Danny everything. He doesn't tell him what's going to happen. He shows him, and he shows him like horrific pictures of the hotel and the things that are happening in it. And so Danny is very uneasy about wanting to go to this job, wanting to go to this place, but even as a 5-year-old, he knows this is my dad's only shot of getting reliable work. my daddy has had the bad thing, which which refers to his father's alcoholism, and he hasn't done the bad thing, but this will keep him from doing the bad thing, and this will keep him from getting a job and, making sure they have some stability and security with some money. Anyway, so and Dick Halloran is like, if you see something in this hotel and you're scared, tell me, or kind of tell me through your mind, and maybe I'll be able to hear you. So, so then they go and they live in the hotel. Now, the difference with the movie is that they go to the hotel and it jumps like a month. And yeah, that happens in the book, but it's more like way more things happen. There's the director of the hotel, whose name is Stuart Ullman, who hired Jack. He wants Jack to, fix some things in the hotel and like reshingle the roof and take care of in the movie there's a hedge maze that you may be familiar with, but that's not in the book. It's hedge animals, and he's like, just trim the hedge animals and things like that. And so he does, and so there's a lot of little things in the book where, yes, he's taking care of the roof, and he's taking care of the hedge animals, and there's a playground there, and there's a lot of really, there's a lot of love in The Shining, in the beginning part, because this is just a family, and it's a loving family. And unfortunately, you don't see that in the movie. You just see, Jack Nicholson as Jack going absolutely crazy. And you don't see him being a good father, and which Jack is in the movie, or in the book. He is a good father, at least in the beginning. He cares about loves his wife, he loves his son, he loves his job, and he really wants to do well. The desire to drink is always there, but that's maybe just part of being an alcoholic. But he knows, there's absolutely no liquor up here, so I can't have any anyway, and he's fine with that. But what happens is that he does his job, and one of his main jobs in the hotel is to quote unquote dump the boiler, because the boiler in the hotel is very old, and according to the main maintenance guy of the hotel, it creeps, and is what it says, and the furnace temperature goes up and up and up, and periodically throughout the day, Jack's job is to turn the boiler to where it won't do that anymore. And he's pretty good at doing that, always remembering that. But along, in big spaces, in big places, there's always storage boxes. There's stuff in the overlooked basement, and there's stuff in the attic. And so one day, while Jack is, dumping the boiler, he looks around and he notices a scrapbook. And he peers through it and he reads it. And it's all about historical things that have happened in this hotel. And there's a lot of things that's happened. This hotel was built in like the early 1900s, and the book was written in 77, so let's say that it was in that present time. So it's been around for about 75 years. So there have been balls there have been special events, there's been, they have a presidential suite, so there's been presidents that have stayed there, but it seems that with almost everything that happens in this hotel, something really bad happens. One of the big things that keeps popping up that happened in this hotel at one point was this masked ball that happened on New Year's Eve. And what happened was that, again, there was a masked ball, and at midnight, everybody was supposed to take their masks off. And unfortunately, I don't know what significance that was with the book. I don't know if when if they unmasked, if then there was like a murder spree or something. It seemed that way in the book, but in my mind, it never, or what I read, I never realized or learned what happened. Maybe who've read it and know could tell me or write it in the comments. Anyway, and with Jack finding this scrapbook, now he becomes really obsessed about this hotel. And the hotel as a person, or kind of as a kind of personification, starts to work in him. And it starts to really take kind of a human form. And not only does it happen with Jack, it happens with Danny. And Danny starts to see things that Tony showed him before they moved to the Overlook. He's really starting to see them. One of the things that he sees, and this is in the movie, is Halloran tells him about a woman who committed suicide in one of the rooms. And in the movie, the room is 237, but in the book, the room is 217. Hence the 217 part of my thing. As a side note, the doc of my screen name is what Danny is called. That's his nickname. And so therefore you have Doc 217. Anyway, but so Danny is really curious about this, and he goes into 217, and he happens to see this woman, and except she's very dead and very gross and very, that scene is probably the scariest part in this book. And because again, you know, if you watch the movie, you know what happens. It's pretty similar, except instead of Jack, it happens with Danny. Anyway, and so now Danny is also seeing more people, and both Jack and Wendy are also seeing effects from the Overlook becoming more human. The hedge animals are starting to come to life. Jack sees them first and is really scared, but then he's like, no, that didn't happen. And then Danny sees them and tells his family about them, and Wendy's like, Jack, did you see this? And Jack was like, no, I didn't see him. The same thing happens with 217. Danny tells Wendy and Jack what happened, and Jack goes to investigate, and at first he doesn't see anything, but then he does. He does see the woman. He doesn't see her quite as closely as Danny did, but he sees that somebody is there. But again, he tells Wendy nothing happened. No, I didn't see anything. So, and now that, with the hotel coming back to life, Jack is being visited by, different employers of the hotel. He imagines, at the hotel bar being waited on by a bartender who he calls Lloyd, and Lloyd gives him drinks. And now there's no liquor in the hotel, but Jack thinks that he's drinking. And Jack also comes across a man named Delbert Grady. And Grady was a previous caretaker of the Overlook, and Grady also had a wife and 2 girls, and he became kind of cabin feverish and became insane and had killed his girls and his wife and then himself. Stuart Ullman tells Jack all this, and Jack's like, okay, that's a nice little story. That's not going to happen with me. But Grady is now telling Jack, your son is very talented with his shining. They have to be dealt with, because he's in the way of what you can do for this hotel. Like, Grady and Lloyd are telling Jack that he can go high and he can become very powerful for this hotel. And for Jack, you know, somebody who's kind of been down on his luck as far as job wise and kind of had kind of rough things happen to him, this is really good for him. So he goes and he's taken in by the Overlook, and then he becomes insane, and he starts to have the same habits and same persona as he did when he was drinking. And that really scares Wendy and Danny, because they're like, well, he's drunk, and if he is or if he isn't, because there's no alcohol, that's not really the problem. He's now drunk where he's violent, and he's now going to hurt them. And so, and Danny tries to call Dick Halloran, and Dick eventually comes, and that's, again, the movie and the book ending, as far as Dick goes, are very different. And, but Dick goes and gets Wendy and Danny, and they get out, and they survive. So that's the end of the book. Again, there's a lot that I didn't cover, and a lot that is still there. So if you have a chance, and if you, again, like I said, if you really like the book, read it. Or if you really like the movie, read the book. Because if you recall, like 15 years ago, they did a mini-series about this, and that was way closer to the book. So if you've been with that, that's pretty similar to how the book is, but still, read the book. It's great. One of the reasons why I read The Shining was because Stephen King now has put out the sequel to The Shining, and it's called Dr. Sleep, and I got it for my Kindle, so I'm currently reading that now, and that'll be my next review. So I bid you all farewell, and happy reading.